Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress Live Podcast. Do we have an incredible show for you tonight? We have the hardest working delegation in the country right here, all consumed together, and they are all in Washington, D.C., hot at work, but they never forget about Rhode Island because they are taking the time out from voting on the floor from the two congressmen today to the two senators giving us their time to make sure that Rhode Island is always their number one priority. Welcome, gentlemen, and we're so excited to have you on the show this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, Tina. Great to
Thanks,
be with
Tina.
you.
Good to be with you.
We're gonna get right into this, and we're gonna start with you, Congressman Langevin. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why the ADA is important to you.
Well, again, Tina, thanks for having us on the program, putting this together, and educating people about the importance of the ADA and how it's made a difference in America. As many people know, this past Monday, we celebrated the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was in Washington. I was with President Biden and Vice President Harris at the White House for a ceremony there commemorating the event. And it's just an opportunity to reflect on how far we've come, but also a reminder that we still have a long way to go toward fully realizing the promise of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I was injured a full 10 years before ADA was enacted into law. As you know, I had a spinal cord injury when I was 16 years old, an accidental gunshot that left me paralyzed. And so I remember what the world was like before ADA and now what it's like afterward. So it's made a profound difference in my life, and I know that I would not be serving in Congress without it. But I'm proud to fight for efforts to open up doors and bring down barriers for people with disabilities. And we can talk more about some of those things later on the show. But again, it's made a big difference in my life and the lives of millions of people, but there's more work to do. And I'm just always say how proud I am to be able to work with this great delegation, Senator Reid, Senator Whitehouse, my colleague in the House, David Cicilline. I couldn't have better partners in the effort to both representing Rhode Island, but also promoting access to people with disabilities. I have great friends and partners in our delegation. I'm grateful for their friendship.
Yeah. I may be biased, but I think we have the best delegation here, right here in Rhode Island, because I get to personally work with each one of you, and you guys are amazing. Congressman Cicilline, tell us a little bit about you and why the ADA is important to you.
Yeah, thank you again for having us, Tina. And, you know, I first kind of got involved with the issue of the disability community actually many, many years ago when I was on the board of Very Special Arts Rhode Island, which was an organization that made certain that both the visual and performing arts were opportunities that were available to people regardless of their disabilities. And what I learned in that is that, you know, it's important that we make sure everyone has the ability to access all of the opportunities that exist in our state and in our country. The ADA is obviously an important part of that, but I've had the great honor for the last 12 years of working alongside Congressman Langevin. So I get to see every single day the incredible perseverance and the work that he does. And it's been an inspiration to me to watch someone who has incredible courage, incredible fight in him, and that works hard every day for Rhode Islanders. But it also is a reminder that the ADA, you know, brought a lot of progress, but there's still a lot more work to do so that folks who have disabilities have all the full opportunities that we want everyone in our communities to have. And so we're celebrating the progress, a lot more work to do, but there's nobody who demonstrates the importance of this more than Jim and you, Tina, who've been also such an incredibly inspiring person in this movement. And we just thank you for all the passion you bring to this work as well.
Thank you so much. Senator Reid, tell us a little about you and being a veteran. And I know you have a lot of people who, you know, are in this community because of the veteran status. So tell us why it's important to you.
Well, the Americans with Disability Act empowers so many Americans, and they contribute so much to our country in every way, shape, and form. And I'll begin with Congressman Jim Langevin. He's been an extraordinary colleague, and he's contributed based on his knowledge of cybersecurity. But I think also he's contributed because he's been able to overcome obstacles that we can't even contemplate. And he's just one example of my colleagues. As a veteran, I've had the privilege of serving with people like Max Cleland, who was grievously wounded in the Vietnam War. And Max was an inspiration to all of us. And today I serve with Tammy Baldwin, Sheldon and I do, Tammy Duckworth. Sheldon and I both serve with her. Tammy was shot down over Iraq in a helicopter flying it and lost her legs, both legs. And she's incredible. She's just, so when it comes down to it, what we're doing is not helping individuals. Yes, we're doing that. We're helping all of us for the contributions they've made. So this is about empowering America by getting rid of obstacles and letting people use their talents to help us all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Senator Whitehouse, tell us a little bit about you and what the ADA means for you.
Well, to me, it means freedom and opportunity and equality for people who were too often being left behind by completely unnecessary physical barriers. It has opened up employment and opportunity in our country in wonderful ways. And one of the days I'll long remember was the day that the Speaker of the House had the podium rebuilt over in the floor of the House of Representatives so that Jim Langevin could be the first person to preside over the United States House of Representatives from a wheelchair. So we went over, Jim had family there, we were sitting up in the gallery. They'd made this very complicated thing where the steps went up and others slid back, and it made the whole thing wheelchair accessible. And sure enough, there went Jim and grabbed the gavel and presided over the House of Representatives. It was a pretty remarkable moment and emblematic of the kind of things that can happen when people are given that freedom, that opportunity, and that equality.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't like to be inspirations to people. We just want to live our lives. We want to fight to blend in. And, there's some very incredible people who are stuck at home due to inaccessibility, something so fixable, that are missing out on really creating the world. So it's people like Congressman Langevin and others who, push their way through and roll their way up and make it happen. And I thank you all for that. Getting back to our little state of Rhode Island, how do you feel that Rhode Island fares in accessibility, and where do you think we need to go? We'll start with you, Congressman Langevin.
So, like many states, Rhode Island has done a lot to make the state accessible for people with disabilities. So a lot of barriers have been brought down. So you see things like curb cuts and other areas, public buildings that are accessible, but it's not perfect yet, and still a lot of businesses may not be accessible just because they're old buildings, by way of example, and so there's still a lot of challenges there. One of the big areas that I still see as a fully unmet challenge is in the area of transportation, accessible transportation. And so it's one of the reasons why I've introduced the DATA Act, the Disability Access to Transportation Act, that would both create additional grant funding that could be used for things like accessible buses and lifts and ramps and sidewalks and things of that nature that would go further in making our society more inclusive. Would also do things like allow, just for something that we would take for granted, but if someone's accessing public transportation, being able to make a stop along the way. So for example, if they were on their way to work, but they need to drop the child off at daycare first, right now that's not possible. So the DATA Act would make things like that possible, would make it better in terms of more inclusive and accessible transportation options. I often say that the ADA did a lot of great things and making it possible for people with disabilities to get a job. We can come back to that because that's a work in progress. But it does no one any good to be able to get a job if you can't get to the job reliable every day. That's why accessible transportation options are just so important.
I agree with you. Congressman Cicilline, with us being the ocean state, how do you think our beaches fare? We used to be a leader in our oceans and being accessible, and that's fallen off quite some time, that it's very hard for somebody in a wheelchair to access the beaches, which I love. How do you think we can make our beaches more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Jim said is really important. First of all, we need to do a lot of work in our transportation system, and we're in the process of constructing a major investment in infrastructure. And I know that's an important priority for all of us, to be sure that we're making investments that are accessible to everyone. So we have a real once in a lifetime opportunity, I think, with the new infrastructure bill to do that. Transportation is a big piece of it, but also you're right, you know, we're the ocean state. It ought to be just as easy for someone who's in a wheelchair to access our beautiful oceans as everyone else. It's one of the pride and joys of our state, and we have a lot of work to do. It's very difficult in most places to access the water. And, you know, we all, you know, sort of treasure our oceans. We promote them around the country. Rhode Island is known for them, but they need to be accessible to all Rhode Islanders and visitors of every ability, and particularly people who are in wheelchairs. And we have a lot of work to do. And the other area that I think, you know, I think we're 10th in the nation in terms of employment of people with disabilities. So we're in a good spot, but obviously there's more work we can do to be sure that folks have good career opportunities. I think that transportation is a big piece of that, as Jim mentioned. But I think ocean access is something we have a lot of work to do on.
Tina, I just want to take a minute on that very point, as I agree with everything David just said, but I also want to commend you for what you just accomplished in getting the kind of the roller mats that go from the parking lot right down to the water. Right, so I saw you on the news clip.
Yeah, at the Andrea and Misquamicut Beach.
Yep.
I've actually spoken with them. Yeah, I've actually spoken with them since, and their business literally tripled because they put Moby mats down, and everybody wants to take their grandparents and their friends and family. So who would not, on the ocean state, want to triple their business by putting a few mats down? How easy is that? You know what I mean? It's incredible. So we're going to keep working on that, because I need to get my butt to the beach. I love our oceans. Senator Reed, we were just at a conference with the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, and I was lucky enough by all of you to be invited to that table. Tell us how our Health and Human Services Department and what we're doing in Rhode Island for people with disabilities.
Well, we've made progress since 1990 when the ADA was first enacted, but we still have a long way to go. We want to be able to ensure that every person in Rhode Island, disabled or able, gets access to every facility. We're still not there yet. And we also want to work closely with the federal government to ensure that they provide the resources and the help that's necessary. We have been, over the years, trying to make sure we have the funding to carry out many federal programs that assist the state. One of the areas is not within HHS, but within the Department of Transportation. The funding we've gotten there has helped create sidewalks that are wheelchair accessible, crosswalks that are wheelchair accessible, paths, bike paths that can be used by people with accessibility or movement issues. And so we have to do a lot. But with Javier Becerra, our Secretary of HHS, who you met, he's committed to making sure the department focuses on the full range of obstacles that prevent access. And that should be our key.
Yeah. And he's also, I found out, a fan of this podcast. So he's probably watching somewhere out and about wherever he is right now, because he told me he's a fan of my podcast. So that's pretty cool. Senator Whitehouse, why don't you tell us a little bit more of, you know, about the health aspect, because you were at that meeting as well, and you had a lot to offer, you know, and I'd love you to share that with all of our viewers today.
Well, first, the secretary was for sure impressed by you. We could definitely see that in the room. I think you get 4 thumbs up from the whole delegation for the impression you made on the HHS secretary. And I just, you know, don't want to be outdone on the beaches thing by overlooking sailing. And one of the very special things about Rhode Island is Sail to Prevail, which is a sailing program operating out of Newport by a wonderful gentleman named Paul Callahan that takes people who have disabilities out and lets them sail sailboats on beautiful Narragansett Bay. There are not a lot of places where people get that opportunity. Paul and his group have made it very accessible. I keep trying to drag Jim out there, and he keeps saying, I don't float so well. I'm not that interested. It has nothing to do with my disability. I just don't like it. But it's, you know, it's one of the many ways I think in which Rhode Island is doing small but important things to try to help reach the disabilities community and give them the full expression of what we can do in Rhode Island. One small story: when Ted Kennedy was still alive, he sailed into Newport Harbor and he called me up and he said, I'm going to take Claiborne Pell sailing. I want you to come. Well, Claiborne Pell was in a wheelchair then. He'd gotten very elderly. So we had to take Claiborne Pell in his wheelchair, rattling down the docks and across the floats, and hoist him up between the moving boat and the moving dock and get him safely in the boat and get us on our way. I have a photograph of that day by my desk in my main office, and it was incredibly memorable. And again, it shows what, you know, persistence and love for a friend can do to get somebody wheelchair bound out into a wonderful experience. Claiborne Pell wasn't even really speaking at that point, but that was okay because Teddy Kennedy could speak for two.
Nice. Well, I know, Congressman Langevin, you have been out on the Impossible Dream, the sail catamaran that comes around from Florida to Rhode Island. Actually, they go to Maine and then they come back. They'll be coming back in August. So hopefully you'll be coming out on a sail with me this season. You're actually sitting in your chair on a sailboat. It is the most incredible experience ever. The one thing that I didn't like about my sail is after we got off this beautiful 2-hour sail out in Newport Harbor, I rode around Newport for 2 hours and couldn't enter one building because of my wheelchair. All because of that inevitable one step that they could fix very easily. We have a big event coming up here in Rhode Island called Accessibility is Beautiful. It's going to be a Rhode Island first. Our organization is hosting it, but I know all of you are behind it. Why should businesses take advantage of this free informational festival about learning about accessibility? We'll start with you, Congressman Langevin.
Well, they should definitely want to participate because it's about expanding their customer base, if you will. And, you know, people with disabilities spend money at local shops and restaurants and bars. And so the more inclusive and welcoming and accessible it is, you have more customers to come in. If you're not accessible, you're missing out on more customers. So this is the business case for it, but it's also the right thing to do. So, you know, some people don't know about, you know, what a reasonable accommodation is all about. So the event, reaching out to business like you're doing, you know, it's going to hopefully both educate businesses, but it's also going to expand access for customers to come in and spend money and enjoy the great things that Rhode Island has to offer, especially talk about, you know, the great food that we have in Rhode Island, especially seafood.
Nice. And Congressman Cicilline, you brought it up, the fact about hiring the disabled community, and that will be a part of this great event. Why should businesses learn about hiring the disabled community?
Yeah, I mean, I think this event is going to be really exciting. It's on September 18th, and we're all thrilled to be part of it. But I think, you know, our economy can't fully succeed and fully prosper in Rhode Island if you exclude a whole group of people from participating, whether it be as customers or as workers. You just can't reach the full potential of our state without inclusion of everyone. And I think Accessibility is Beautiful. It's going to be an opportunity to understand what it means to growing your business and increasing your customer base, and also giving you the ability to access some of the best talent in Rhode Island who may have be able to now get to your place because you've made certain adjustments and changes. So I think it's going to be a great event. It's going to make Rhode Island a better place, a more welcoming and inclusive place for the disability community, and make us a much stronger economy.
Absolutely. Senator Reid, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. A lot of things that a lot of people from my community hear from businesses is that they're grandfathered in, or they don't have to become ADA compliant. Why is learning about this free event, this free and informational event, so important to get rid of that notion that the grandfathered in doesn't actually exist?
Well, I think it's terribly important, and I first want to make an unpaid commercial announcement. The September 18th event, that's September 18th, everyone, is at the Steel Yard. And it's very symbolic because the Steel Yard was a 100-year-old factory building that has been transformed for accessibility purposes and other purposes, but it's an example of what can be done and what should be done. And I think one of the reasons this whole notion of grandfathering, et cetera, disregards something that's happening, and in a way it alludes to Senator Whitehouse's story of Senator Pell. As people grow older now, and fortunately people living longer, more and more people have accessibility problems. They might not be from an injury or something else. It's just, I hate to say it, maturing, because I'm maturing myself. But the customer base for most businesses is going to have these adaptable entrances, because more and more of their customers, and in some cases their workers, will need that kind of access to get in. So I think your demonstration on, once again, September 18th at the Steel Yard is going to be a great visualization to people of what can and should be done.
Oh, thank you so much. We're
You know,
excited.
we have to go and vote, so we're going to go
Okay,
and vote.
we'll see you when you come back.
Okay, see you in a bit.
Okay, we'll see you in a few. Senator Whitehouse, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here now. It's your turn. With the population, what people don't understand is 20%, 26% of our population, that's 1 in 4 people, have a disability in the United States right now. But when 2030 hits and the baby boomers hit, over 65 and older, over half of Rhode Island's population is going to be in that 65 and older. But what isn't calculated is those 65 and older that happen to use a cane, walker, or a wheelchair because they're just elderly. They're not disabled, but they're not counted. So if over half of our Rhode Island population by 2030 is going to be in this, if you're not talking about accessibility now, your business is going to be in a little bit of trouble when you're alienating half our population. What do you say to businesses when you hear statistics like that?
Well, I think, businesses need to know what their market is, and they need to know what their audience is. And in Rhode Island, as you point out, we're, I think, the oldest state in the country on average. We have people who live a long time and who stay here. And the result is that we have a population that is more elderly than most other states. And as time goes by, they continue to get older. That's what time does to us. So I think businesses can see that coming. The other thing that I'd react to is, what you said about businesses wondering why they have to comply with the ADA and why they have to do things around their supposed grandfathering. And I think what the point you're making is that they shouldn't feel like they have to. They should want to.
Right.
Because they've got customers out there who are going to want to come in and who are going to want to shop and eat and have a drink and do all the things that people do in commercial establishments. And they need to make sure that they're accessible to them. And that's something that businesses shouldn't feel is being forced on them. That's something that businesses should feel is part of their smart business plan, smart business strategy.
Absolutely. And, like I say, if coronavirus did anything for our country, it gave everybody a small glimpse of what the disabled community deals with, how we were locked away in our homes, how no one could go out to a business, no one could see family, we live that every day, whether there's a pandemic or not. You didn't like the isolation. So now when we're opening and we have our favorite sandwich at the restaurant down the street, or we want to go listen to the music we've been listening to online, we want to go to your establishment, take us with you. We're basically begging you to become accessible so we can give you our money. What do you say to something like that?
Tina, I gotta hand it to you.
Yeah.
You made that point so eloquently to Secretary Becerra. I mean, that was kind of the standout point that you made, that we all got a window during COVID into what people who are kept at home by a disability live with all the time. And we must never forget that.
Yeah, and I mean, it was great that, we were told for years that you can't go to the doctor online, you can't do a meeting online, you can't work from online. And within a month, everybody was doing it. I mean, and as well and great as all of that, I miss people too, that I want to be able to do all of that out and about in public and be face to face, because there's nothing better than having that interaction with our fellow Rhode Islanders, and especially, like I said, I can't stress it enough, our beaches. I want to get to our beaches. I love our oceans, and that's why we're all living longer here in Rhode Island, because of the salt air. But Senator Reed, give us some idea of how COVID affected that, and what we should be thinking of in the future.
Well, I think you've made some excellent points already, Tina, in terms of COVID forced us all to isolate. And that has been the situation with disabled Americans for years and years and years. The difficulty of getting out, of getting around, we sensed that personally, and we understood the kind of difficulty and also the mental pressures and everything else that was associated with it. So that has also given us the opportunity to accelerate techniques like Zoom, for example, where you can work and you can communicate with people without being physically there virtually. It also gave us the opportunity to think about other technologies, for fact, telemedicine. You're very right. That was sort of an arcane area that was being developed, but it suddenly became accelerated because of the pandemic. And for not only disabled individuals, but for all Americans, that's now a much more convenient way to get a healthcare assessment. That's going to help us. So this whole COVID episode, and again, as Sheldon pointed out so rightly, your very, very careful and eloquent description to the secretary was deeply impressive. That whole episode has given us an idea of what we can do and what we must do to connect everyone and to give people the opportunity to avoid isolation and exclusion.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk to all of you, and welcome back, gentlemen. Anybody can jump in on this one, but with this housing crisis going on and the eviction memorandum in Rhode Island coming up, and what do we do about physically accessible stock for housing in Rhode Island? They just opened up two 30-unit sections in two different parts of the state, but none of them are physical accessible units. How can we make sure that we're thinking about that? Because it's easier to make it accessible while you're building it than it is to go back and refix it later. How can we make sure that we're addressing that now, so that we have, because it took me 2 years to find a wheelchair accessible home that I could take my family to. Yeah, you could go to a housing complex or a high rise, but I still had a son and a husband. I didn't want to go live like that when I still had a family. And you know me, I'm out and about in the community 90% of the time, that I needed to, be more mobile. How can we address that? Anybody who wants to take that question?
Tina, it does come all about funding and planning, right? And we know that Rhode Island has a real problem with affordable housing. Is an even bigger problem with accessible housing. So we have to have this as a forethought. And I know this delegation is all together fought hard to bring federal funds back to build these accessible and affordable housing units. We need to make sure that there's more accessible ones, and they can be dual use. If someone's going to if you're going to build a affordable housing, so many things can be done that it's accessible going forward for anyone that's going to live there.
Yeah, I know you're all a big supporter, because Rhode Island. Go ahead, Senator Reed.
No, I think one thing that we should seriously think about when it comes especially to new housing construction, which has federal support, either through the low-income housing tax credits or through other programs, that they should include accessibility as one of the criteria. You pointed out it's very difficult sometimes to take an old house that was designed and built in the 20s or 30s and make it accessible. But when you're doing new construction, accessibility should be particularly supported by federal funds, or even state funds should be part of the equation.
Yeah. The way the way the Rhode Island housing is written right now is 1/4 of an apartment building has to be ADA adaptable. As we all know, adaptable is not accessible. That means that they have to make at least one unit ADA adaptable. But let's be honest, every construction company is going to take the cheapest way out. They're going to make it adaptable to somebody who's blind or autistic or, with a mental health issue. We need to make sure that we're changing the wording to be physically accessible, because if it fits a wheelchair, anybody can use it down the road. Yes, it's good for a wheelchair, but anybody can do it down the road. What are your thoughts on that, Senator Whitehouse?
Well, I think you've made a terrific point, and I'm rethinking the day that we had before we came down Monday, when we opened a wonderful new low-income housing development in Olneyville. But as I'm thinking about it, I went upstairs into the front door, and I went downstairs out of the back door, and I walked into a smaller solar mini development in the back that was, again, upstairs and had very steep stairs to get to the second floor in those modules. So yeah, we just did that. And you're lucky to have Senator Reid hearing you here, because Senator Reid is the senior Democrat on the banking committee, which oversees housing. And I'm pretty sure that Jack Reed has won every single housing award nationally that there is to offer. And they're now recycling and giving them to him a second and a third time because he's so influential in that area. So you definitely have the right guy on the show here.
Oh, yeah.
In our senior senator.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we're talking low-income housing, I mean, who's more low-income than the SSDI recipients who are in wheelchairs, who we don't even get paid a living wage at this point? That, it's being revisited. There's bills going on. Like, I'm not, crashing it, because we're trying to make, but we're already not even getting a living wage. Now trying to find an apartment that's wheelchair accessible. We need to be thinking of that ahead. And, all of this federal state funding that's come down during the pandemic, nothing extra came to the recipients of SSDI. It's hard enough trying to live day to day when you're not given a living wage a month. But now you got to hoard and you got to try to beat everybody to the market when you're already immune compromised. Congressman Cicilline, what can you say on those points, and how can we do better?
Yeah, no, I think to underscore Sheldon's point, I mean, Senator Reid is I think not only in our delegation but in the Congress, like the foremost housing advocate and expert. So I think it's an opportunity, obviously, to help influence policy at the highest levels in this country. But I think, you've identified, we have a big challenge in Rhode Island in terms of the production of more housing units. And we've got to invest a lot more in housing. We're going to do a big piece of it here at the federal level that will bring lots of resources to Rhode Island. But in doing so, we also, I think you're absolutely right, we also have to figure out how we ensure that, it's much easier today to build new accessible units than retrofitting buildings, and also, the designs are cool and beautiful now. In the old days, they were not so good to look at. So you can make units accessible, and it's beautiful. The design is beautiful. It's much less expensive. So I think voices like yours, making sure that we include that as a priority in housing plans and in housing funding and creating incentives and providing resources to make sure units are accessible, I think is a really smart idea.
Yeah. I mean, physically accessibility goes in all aspects. I mean, there's still a lot of times where we can't even get on the examination tables and out of our wheelchairs because we don't have proper examination tables. Or in schools, we make certain wings of schools accessible for the students, but we forget that there are people like me who's in a wheelchair, but my children are fine and accessible, but I can't participate because I can't access the school or the offices or things. So we need to think of physical accessibility in all areas, not just for the individual using it, but for the family members that may be supporting or loving them. Now that we're getting near the end of the hour, I'd like to start with you, Senator Reid. I'm going to ask the same question to all of you. What are your last words that you would like to leave all of Rhode Island and actually the nation, because we're a national podcast, about accessibility and what we can do to be better? So, Senator Reid?
Well, this really comes down to an issue of responsibility and rights. It should be the right of every American to have access to public facilities, to their home, and it should be the responsibility of every American to see that's accomplished. And that's why working together, and I'm very proud to be part of this delegation, we at the federal level and our partners at the state and local levels should be working on practical ways to assure access for all. That means investing in infrastructure. It means putting money back into our schools. You just pointed out some of our schools were built in the frankly, for 50s and 60s and before, when there was no federal legislation. They might have made some changes for accessibility for the students, but your point's well taken. They forget about making the auditorium accessible to everyone, including parents and friends. So we have to push that. But it comes down to me as, again, it's the right of every American to be able to access particularly public facilities, and it's the responsibility of every American to make that happen.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Well, first of all, Tina, thank you for inviting us all on this, for your wonderful presentation, to Secretary Becerra for your successful advocacy down at wonderful Andrea's on Musquamacut Beach. Good place to go for a nice refreshment on a summer afternoon. I think it's also an opportunity to celebrate some small changes that are to the benefit of the disability community. And that's particularly in the American Rescue Plan and in the extension of it that we're working on right now in the Senate through reconciliation, to make sure that families who have someone with a disability have better access to care at home to help support the family caring for that individual. Now, that's not going to be important for every single person with a disability, but it's going to be important for a lot of them and for a lot of families. And I think it's going to change the way a lot of families are able to live. And so we're excited about that. You're terrific to keep reminding us of the more things that need to be done. But there's a thing we didn't get to that I think is going to make a big difference in a large segment of the disability community. And then all of us are just so impressed and so inspired and have such a wonderful experience working with Jim Langevin, who lives this every single day and is extremely successful. He's the cyber is a really big issue in our country right now, and the expert on that issue in the House of Representatives is Jim Langevin, none other. And he's doing this, from a wheelchair, uncomplaining, always there, working hard, very successful. And so my last words would be words of recognition and appreciation for our wonderful colleague, Jim Langevin.
Oh, thank you so much. Congressman Cicilline.
Well, first, Tina, thank you again for having us, and thank you for all of your incredible work and advocacy and lifting up this important responsibility that we have as a state and as a country to be sure that every place is physically accessible. And the reality is, the barriers that exist today mean that some Rhode Islanders and some people in this country don't have the opportunity to fully participate in all of the experiences of life, both work experiences, personal experiences, and to appreciate all that Rhode Island and America has to offer. And it's our responsibility to make sure every single person has that same right, and that right is honored by the work that we do in government. And so we have lots of work to do. But I would also remind people that, it's not only harmful to the people who have disabilities when they're denied access, it's harmful to all of us, because we're robbed of the contributions they could make, the experiences we would have meeting these folks or working with these folks or seeing them on the beach. So it cheats the whole community out of all that the disability community can contribute to our lives. I know that firsthand, having had the privilege of working with Jim Langevin and getting to work with him every single day, and can't imagine what it would be like to be serving in Congress without him. So he's an example of what a difference it makes when people have opportunities. We have to make sure every Rhode Islander, every person in this country has the same ability to fully access everything in their lives, and we'll be a better country for it.
Thank you. Jim Langevin, Congressman Langevin.
Well, Tina, thank you. And as we say in Congress, let me associate myself with David's remarks and thank him for his kind words and his passion on this issue, and all of my colleagues, Senator Reid, Senator Whitehouse. I couldn't have better friends, colleagues, and partners to work with in the Congress, fighting for the people of Rhode Island, but also working hard to make sure that people with disabilities are not left behind. that we're working hard every day to bring down barriers, open up doors of opportunity. The Americans with Disabilities Act was just a game-changing law that made such a huge, profound difference for the people of our country, both able-bodied and people with disabilities. But obviously, the disabilities community, changing it from accessibility from being just a courtesy, but to being a civil right. So, Tina, I thank you for everything that you're doing to highlight the issue of accessibility and inclusion. It's just so vitally important. There's still more work yet to be done. Again, the ADA was a great start, but we've got more work to do. I'm excited about President Biden's effort in the broader infrastructure bill to strengthen the care economy, so that we're making sure that people can live actively and independently in their communities. Remember not long ago, the Olmstead decision, and basically that says that people have a right to live actively and independently in their communities. But we're not quite there. We haven't realized the promise of both ADA or the Olmstead decision, and President Biden's vision of broadening our infrastructure, thinking of infrastructure not as just roads and bridges, which are important, and that's in the infrastructure package, but thinking about infrastructure in terms of the healthcare aspects of inclusion, and again, making it possible for people with disabilities to live more actively and independently in our communities by strengthening the care economy. Those are the things that I'm working on, that we are working on together, and hopefully we're going to be successful in getting that across the finish line. So I'm excited about the future, but we're going to get there together. And Tina, thank you for what you're doing.
I'm absolutely excited about the future. And like I said, I can't say it enough, and I'm not just saying it because you're all staring at me right now, but we do have the best Rhode Island delegation, because you all put up with me calling your offices I don't know how many times a week. Make sure you're checking on this, make sure you're doing on that, and you do it with a smile, and you guys actually call me back. It's not your staffers a lot of the times. I actually hear from you. And I'm still throwing it out there. I'm a volunteer staffer for every single one of you, because representation is awesome and it is so important. And I will roll around with any one of you at any event, anytime, to give you ideas and pointers and making sure you're thinking of that physical accessibility. So I'm going to be a thorn in your side, but you guys welcome me with a smile, and I can't do what I do without your support. And we do have the best Rhode Island delegation, and I thank you all for the work that you do in Rhode Island and at a federal level to making sure that we all are protected and we are all heard and we are all seen. So thank you for everything that you do. I'm excited.
And
I thank you for your time tonight.
We'll see you September 18th.
September 18th.
Oh, absolutely.
Steel Yard in Providence at the big event.
Yeah, so everybody needs to come down on September 18th. It is a free event. It is a safe place to learn all about accessibility is beautiful. You get free assessments for your business. We'll give you ideas of tax breaks and grant matching. We're even going to raffle off a ramp to one lucky business to make your business front door fully accessible. So showing up and giving a few hours of time, you could be the winner of a free ramp and get more people into your establishment. So this is definitely, you do not want to miss this event. And like I said, I am open and welcome to any event that you guys, either here in Rhode Island, in Washington. I will follow you guys anywhere and support your work and keep speaking out. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for making Rhode Island so proud at the federal level. And thank you for all of that you do. Have a great night, everybody. Make sure you're reaching out to this delegation. And as I always say, don't just sit there, make a difference. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night now.